Welcome back to Violent Origins, where we uncover humanity's most brutal truths buried in bone and stone. You know that feeling, right? When you see a face that's almost human, but something deep in your gut screams, "Run." It's not disgust, not fear exactly, it's something older. Something that bypasses your rational mind and hits you like a sledgehammer to the chest. This isn't right. This thing shouldn't exist. Scientists call it the Uncanny Valley. But here's what they won't tell you. This reaction didn't evolve because of robots or CGI monsters. Our ancestors lived through something far more terrifying than any Hollywood nightmare. See, our brains are ancient war machines, forged in a world where survival meant instantly recognizing friend from foe. But what if this bone-deep terror comes from something most people never consider? What if it's the last genetic memory of a time when Earth wasn't just home to Homo sapiens? When other things that walked upright, looked human, almost human, hunted us, bred with us, and sometimes devoured our children in the African night. Because here's the thing, maybe the Uncanny Valley isn't just some weird quirk of psychology. Maybe it's a battle scar from humanity's most violent chapter. And the evidence? It's carved into bones that archaeologists are still digging up today. The birth of the Uncanny Valley. The Uncanny Valley was first mapped by Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori back in 1970. He noticed something deeply disturbing about human behavior. The more realistic a robot became, the more we liked it. Until it crossed this invisible line. Then everything flipped. Instead of comfort, people felt revulsion, physical nausea. The robot looked too human, but the subtle wrongness triggered something primal. Mori called this sharp drop in acceptance the Valley of the Uncanny. And it wasn't just robots. Wax figures made people's skin crawl. CGI characters that were almost perfect sent audiences fleeing from theaters. Think about early computer-animated films like The Polar Express. Technically impressive, but those dead-eyed characters haunted children's nightmares. Something about faces that mimicked humanity but missed the mark by just a fraction triggered an automatic, visceral response. You didn't have to think about it. You didn't have to analyze what was wrong. Your body just knew. But here's what keeps me awake. At night, evolutionary psychologists know that reactions this strong, this universal, don't happen by accident. They evolve because, at some brutal point in our past, they kept our ancestors alive. The snake in the grass. Let me paint you a picture of how ancient fears work. Think about our terror of snakes. This isn't learned behavior, it's hardwired into our DNA. Primates across the globe are programmed to fear serpents, and recent studies show even crude snake-like shapes trigger massive stress responses in monkeys. Researchers showed laboratory monkeys objects that only vaguely resembled snakes, twisted ropes, curved sticks, anything with that sinuous shape. Even these primitive representations sent the monkeys into panic mode. Heart rates spiked. Stress hormones flooded their systems. Their brains screamed danger before they could even process what they were seeing. Why? Because for millions of years, failing to spot that sinuous movement in the grass meant death. The venomous bite of a cobra or viper was a death sentence in the ancient world. No antivenom, no medical intervention, just poison coursing through your veins as you convulsed and died. No second chances, no learning from mistakes. The primates who couldn't instantly recognize serpent shapes, their bloodlines ended right there in the African savanna, their corpses becoming food for the very predators they failed to detect. This is how evolution works. It's not pretty, it's not fair. It's written in blood and bone, carved into our genetics by millions of years of violent selection pressure. The fearful survived. The trusting died. So ask yourself this: could the Uncanny Valley be exactly the same kind of ancient survival system? A warning mechanism evolved to help us recognize and fear other kinds of humans? Ones that looked like us, but weren't us. The big-headed hunters. And just this year, in 2024, archaeologists dropped a bombshell that changes everything we thought we knew about human evolution. They've identified a completely new species of ancient human Homo juluensis, the big-headed people. This discovery is absolutely mind-blowing, and most people have no idea it even happened. While you were scrolling through social media, scientists were quietly rewriting the story of human evolution based on fossils found across China. These weren't distant ape-like ancestors shuffling through the forest. These were sophisticated hunters with massive skulls and oversized teeth who lived alongside us in Asia until just 50,000 years ago. They made complex stone tools, processed animal hides with precision, and hunted in coordinated groups that could take down massive prehistoric horses. But here's what makes my blood run cold. They had brain capacities larger than modern humans, larger than Neanderthals. These big-headed hunters weren't just smart. They were potentially smarter than us. And they shared the same hunting grounds as our direct ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years. The fossils tell a story of beings that were undeniably human, but wrong in subtle, disturbing ways. Skulls that measured between 103 and 109 cubic inches, compared to our measly 82 cubic inches. Teeth that were oversized and adapted for tearing meat. Bone structure that was clearly humanoid, but proportioned like something from a fever dream. Now imagine this scenario. You're an early Homo sapiens tracking game through the misty forests of ancient China. The morning fog clings to the trees as you follow deer tracks deeper into unfamiliar territory. Then, you spot movement ahead through the mist. Upright, bipedal, human. But the skull is wrong, too large. The proportions slightly off. The teeth, when it turns to look at you, are designed for ripping flesh. Do you approach this creature that looks so much like your own kind? Or does every instinct in your body scream at you to hide? Because that split-second decision? It literally meant the difference between your genetic line surviving or vanishing forever. And our species faced this choice not just once, but hundreds of thousands of times across the prehistoric landscape. A crowded and violent world. For most of human evolution, we weren't the dominant species on this planet. We weren't even close. When modern humans first appeared around 300,000 years ago, Earth was a crowded, violent place where multiple human species competed for the same resources, the same territories, the same prey. We shared our world with at least 4 other human species in Asia alone, and recent discoveries suggest there may have been even more. Each of these groups had evolved different survival strategies, different hunting techniques, different ways of organizing their societies. And they weren't all friendly neighbors sharing resources around a campfire. First, there was Homo erectus, our longest surviving relatives, who had dominated Asia for nearly 2 million years before we showed up. These weren't primitive brutes living in caves. They were sophisticated hunters who had spread across 2 continents, adapting to diverse environments from tropical forests to frozen steppes. But they weren't just gentle cousins coexisting peacefully with early humans. Archaeological evidence shows cut marks on their bones, deep gouges made by stone tools. Someone was systematically butchering them, processing their meat just like any other prey animal. And given the timeline and geographical overlap, that someone was probably us. Think about what that means. Our ancestors looked at beings that were 99% human and decided they were food, not competitors, not potential allies. Food. Then there were the mysterious Homo naledi in South Africa, strange creatures with a bizarre mix of primitive and modern traits. Small brains like our ape ancestors, but hands and feet that were remarkably human-like. We lived alongside them for hundreds of thousands of years, sharing the same landscapes, hunting the same animals. But here's the really creepy part. We have zero evidence of interbreeding between our species and theirs. Zero. Despite living in proximity for millennia, despite having compatible anatomy, something fundamental kept our species separate. What was it about them that triggered our avoidance mechanisms? What subtle wrongness in their appearance or behavior made our ancestors recoil in disgust? We may never know, because Homo naledi vanished completely, leaving only their bones in a single cave system as evidence they ever existed. And then there's the ghost lineage, a population we only know from DNA traces in modern West Africans. We interbred with them as recently as 50,000 years ago, but we've never found their bones. They're literally genetic phantoms haunting our bloodline, proof that our species encountered and mated with beings so mysterious we can't even put faces to their genes. But Asia was where the real nightmare played out. The Asian horror show. Asia during the late Pleistocene was like something out of a horror movie. Multiple human species stalked the same territories, each adapted to different ecological niches, each viewing the others as either prey or competition. Besides the newly discovered Homo juluensis, our ancestors also encountered the Denisovans. And the latest evidence suggests these might actually be the same species, just reclassified. These big-skulled hunters weren't primitive brutes living in caves. Recent discoveries show they had sophisticated tool technologies that rival our own. They may have even created art. They were intelligent enough to pose a real threat to early human expansion into Asia, smart enough to compete directly with us for resources. And perhaps most terrifyingly, similar enough to us that our species occasionally interbred with them, passing their genes down through generations to the present day. Moving through Southeast Asia, our ancestors also faced Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits, and Homo luzonensis. Don't let the nickname fool you. These weren't cute, friendly creatures from a fantasy novel. They were tiny humans with sharp tools and fierce territorial instincts. Imagine encountering one of these diminutive hunters near your camp at night. 3 feet tall, but wielding sophisticated stone weapons. Eyes that reflected firelight, like an animal's. The uncanny combination of human intelligence in a body that was fundamentally wrong. Finding evidence of their presence would have been absolutely terrifying for early human groups. Tiny footprints around your water source. Tool marks on bones that were too small to have been made by adult humans. The knowledge that something almost human was watching you from the shadows. But here's where the story gets really complex, really dark. We know for certain that modern humans interbred with at least 3 other species: Neanderthals, Denisovans, and that mysterious African ghost population. So if we were capable of attraction to these other human species, if we could find them appealing enough to mate with them, why would we also evolve an instinct to fear them? When attraction meets terror. Because attraction and terror can coexist in the most disturbing ways. Think about how serial killers operate. They often charm their victims before striking. They use their human appearance, their ability to mimic normal social behavior, to get close enough to kill. Some of these encounters between human species were peaceful, even romantic. A chance meeting at a water source that led to mutual attraction. Shared resources during harsh winters. Cultural exchange that benefited both groups. But others ended with our ancestors as prey. The uncanny valley might represent the survivor's wisdom, that split-second evaluation system that helped our ancestors distinguish between a potential mate and a potential predator. Between someone who might share resources and someone who might bash your skull in with a rock while you slept. This is where modern psychology gets really interesting, because researchers have identified 3 specific triggers that might explain why the uncanny valley evolved. 3 ancient fears that shaped our species through hundreds of thousands of years of violent selection. The 3 ancient fears. First, disease avoidance. In a world without medicine, without doctors, without any understanding of germs or infection, a sick human could wipe out your entire band in days. Diseases spread like wildfire through small, closely knit groups who shared food, water, and sleeping spaces. And here's a fun fact that'll make your skin crawl. We inherited genital herpes from Paranthropus over 2 million years ago. Yes, you read that correctly. Our ancestors got close enough to those robust, heavy-jawed hominins to contract sexually transmitted diseases. Think about that for a moment. Picture the scene. Our early ancestors, driven by attraction or curiosity, approached these powerful muscular beings with their massive jaws and crushing teeth. Close enough to touch, close enough to mate, close enough to contract diseases that we're still carrying today. But they also evolved incredibly sophisticated mechanisms to detect the sick, the infected, and the wrong. Subtle changes in skin color that might indicate fever. Unnatural eye movements that suggested neurological damage. Jerky, uncoordinated behavior that marked someone as diseased. These weren't conscious observations. They were instant, visceral reactions that happened faster than thought. See the pale skin and glassy eyes. Run. Notice the trembling hands and slurred speech. Avoid contact at all costs. And what's a corpse but the ultimate infected human? Still eerily familiar. Still recognizably one of us, but devoid of the spark of life that marks a healthy individual. Our brains evolved to instantly detect that fine line between life and death, to recoil from anything that fell into that gray area between the living and the dead. Second, recognizing the dead. For ancient humans, corpses weren't just creepy, they were harbingers of doom. Finding bodies meant predators were nearby. It meant disease was spreading through the population. It meant enemy tribes had been through the area, leaving death in their wake. Our brains evolved to instantly recognize death and to react with appropriate caution. That's why zombies, vampires, and other undead creatures are so effective in horror stories. They tap directly into this ancient recognition system that screams warnings when we see something that should be alive but isn't. The uncanny valley might be an extension of this same system. When we see something that looks human but lacks the subtle markers of life, the micro-expressions, the natural breathing patterns, the unconscious body language that marks a living persona, ancient warning systems activate. Third, enemy recognition. But there's a third explanation that brings us back to those shadowy figures stalking through the prehistoric darkness. Enemy recognition. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors didn't just fear leopards and hyenas and saber-toothed cats. They feared other humans. Rival bands of Homo sapiens competing for territory. Neanderthal hunting parties raiding their camps. Big-skulled Homo juluensis warriors, emerging from the mist like something out of a nightmare. These groups were close enough to fool the eye at distance, human enough to trigger our social recognition systems, but different enough to represent mortal danger up close. Distinguishing us from them wasn't about obvious differences like clothing or skin color. It was about reading faces, posture, the subtle movements and expressions that marked friend or foe, the way someone held their spear, the rhythm of their walking gait, the shape of their skull when seen in profile. When the stakes were life and death, when making the wrong choice meant your children would be killed and your territory claimed by rivals, that instant recognition could mean everything. A Neanderthal war party entering your territory at dawn. Homo juluensis hunters stalking your children through the forest. Was this approaching figure a potential ally who might share valuable information about game movements? A trading partner offering useful stone tools? Or something that would gut you where you stood and leave your body for the scavengers? Evolution's early warning system. The uncanny valley might be evolution's gift to USA finely tuned early warning system that took millions of years to perfect. An instinct to instantly assess faces and forms that were almost human, but not quite right. It helped our ancestors react to the very real danger of other hominins with split-second timing. No time for careful consideration. No luxury of extended observation. See the wrong proportions. Feel the instant revulsion. Trust your gut and run. And this explains why the feeling is so immediate, so overwhelming. Your body reacts before your brain can even process what you're seeing. Your heart rate spikes. Your muscles tense. Adrenaline floods your system. All of this happens in milliseconds, faster than conscious thought. It's that old, that deeply embedded in our neural architecture. But here's the darkest question of all, the one that keeps me staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning. Could this instinct have been responsible for driving every other human species to extinction? The last human standing. Think about the pattern. Everywhere Homo sapiens went, every local hominin population vanished. Not gradually, not through natural climate change or resource competition. They disappeared quickly, often within a few thousand years of our arrival. We know we interbred occasionally with other human species, but the genetic evidence suggests those encounters were relatively rare. Maybe most of the time, that uncanny valley response triggered violence instead of attraction. Maybe we didn't just outcompete the other humans through superior technology or social organization. Maybe we systematically hunted them down, exterminated them, wiped entire bloodlines from existence because they triggered that ancient recognition system that screamed, "Not us. Kill them before they kill us." The archaeological record is disturbing when you look at it this way. Cut marks on hominin bones that could only have been made by stone tools. Evidence of systematic butchering. Sites where multiple species lived in proximity until suddenly, abruptly, only Homo sapiens remains appear in the fossil record. Even today, humans have this tendency to meet the other with suspicion, with hostility. What we call racism, xenophobia, tribal warfare, these might just be the uncanny valley in action. A survival mechanism that once helped us identify genuine threats, now turned against our own species. The same neural pathways that once helped our ancestors distinguish between friendly Homo sapiens and potentially dangerous Homo juluensis now fire when we encounter people with different skin colors, different facial features, different ways of moving through the world. It's a sobering thought that something designed to protect us has become one of our greatest sources of division and conflict. The modern uncanny valley. So where does this leave us in our modern world? We rarely face the dangers that forged our ancient minds. Most of us will never fight for territory or hunt for survival. We no longer share Earth with Neanderthals or big-skulled Asian hunters. But that fear remains, lurking in the deepest parts of our brainstem. That instant recognition of the almost human shows up everywhere in our modern lives. You can feel it when you walk past a wax museum at night, when those two perfect faces seem to track your movement with glassy eyes. When you see a CGI character that's just slightly off, when the timing of their blink or the texture of their skin triggers that ancient warning system. It's why certain robots make us deeply uncomfortable, why AI-generated faces sometimes seem more threatening than obviously artificial cartoons. The closer they get to human, the stronger our revulsion becomes. It's the same gut punch response. The same ancient warning system, completely untouched by our modern technology and urban environment. Because buried in our DNA is the memory of a prehistoric world where humans weren't alone, where seeing another upright figure in the darkness could mean death or worse, where the ability to instantly distinguish between friend and foe meant the difference between passing on your genes or becoming food for something that looked almost exactly like you. Conclusion. The monsters that made us. And maybe that's why this fear still grips us so tightly, why it manifests in our horror movies and our nightmares, why it influences our art and our technology and our relationships with each other. Because once upon a time, in the blood-soaked dawn of our species, recognizing the uncanny kept us alive long enough to become the last humans standing. The sole survivors of a brutal evolutionary experiment that tested dozens of human species and found all but one wanting. We are the descendants of the fearful, the suspicious, the quick to violence when faced with the almost human. Our ancestors were the ones who looked at beings that were 99% like them and chose to see monsters instead of cousins. And perhaps that legacy is both our greatest strength and our deepest curse. The same instincts that made us the dominant species on this planet also make us capable of unspeakable cruelty toward anything we perceive as other. The uncanny valley isn't just a quirk of psychology or a problem for robot designers. It's a window into the darkest chapters of human evolution, a reminder that we are the products of violence, fear, and the ruthless elimination of anything that threatened our survival. Thanks for diving into humanity's darkest evolutionary secrets with violent origins. If this exploration of our species' brutal past fascinated you, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what other ancient horrors do you think still haunt our DNA. Subscribe to Violent Origins for more shocking discoveries about humanity's violent origins. And remember, the monsters that shaped us weren't imaginary. They were real. They were almost human. And they're still watching us from the uncanny valley of our deepest fears. Because in the end, we didn't just inherit their genes, we inherited their ghosts.